Joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show, fresh off of posting a 13,000-word tome to try and tell us what NFL executives and scouts and coaches think of the quarterback class getting ready to be drafted in Detroit. My buddy Tom Pelissero back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you doing, Tom?
Rich, I get one tome a year. It is a tad time-consuming, including through the editorial process, making sure that no naughty words slip through. I'm told one very briefly. It was very close to getting out there on the internet, but they caught it at the last second. Our guys, Ali Bonpuri and Gennaro Felice, and those guys do a great job editing the thing down. So it's always fascinating talking to as many teams, coaches, executives, scouts as I possibly can. And this is a really unique quarterback class where, you know, there's certain guys who have fans and, you know, those same players, some people don't believe in them, but there's 5, 6, 7 guys that people see as potential starting quarterbacks in the NFL. History would tell you we're not going to get 5, 6, 7 starting quarterbacks in all likelihood, but certainly there's going to be a lot of interesting potential movement in those top 40 picks or so, and we'll see how many guys come off the board.
All right, so let's walk through it here. I did my best to get through most of the 13,000 words, Tom, and obviously you found a consensus that Caleb Williams is worthy of being the first overall pick in this draft. And in terms of that section, there was one piece that jumped out at me, and it had nothing to do with the tape. It had to do with the contract for Caleb Williams, and that is potentially going to take some doing because of the way he's approached the draft being totally unconventional and how that might actually leak into the contract. Tom?
Well, let's zoom out here for a second here, Rich. So Caleb Williams, from the time that he was like 10 years old, and his dad, Carl, who's a successful businessman, he's worked in the athletic training space, they've had a singular goal. Let's get this guy in a position where he's going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft. They have done that by doing it their own way, and they haven't been concerned about, well, this isn't how other people would do things. You look selfish. They don't care. They're going to make the right decisions for Caleb Williams. So through the course of this process, you've seen Caleb has not had a traditional agent. He's had the team of advisors and attorneys and other people who have guided this process for him. He paused his pre-draft training, went to Tokyo with his girlfriend on a vacation for a while. He didn't do the medical testing that is standardized and 99.999% of guys have gone through the years. He only took one visit, and that was to the Bears. And so there's every reason to believe, based upon the history here, that things might end up being interesting in the contract process as well. It's been reported that his dad, Carl Williams, has in the past expressed to people that potentially equity in a team would be something that they would be interested in. The NFL a year or so ago passed a bylaw in which it says you can't have a player or any other employee owning equity in a team, which I can't tell you what the origins of that rule were, Rich, but certainly it seemed like it was a preemptive type of a thing for people like Caleb Williams or other players coming into the league who might make those types of demands. The bottom line is this: contracts have been slotted for rookies since 2011. There's not a lot of wiggle room. We know that there have been contracts that have gotten hung up on offset language, bonus payment structure, and things like that. But if you just go through everything that Caleb and his team have done here, you'd say nothing is just going to happen the normal cause of business. It's not just going to be they're going to work out the offset language and get the thing done a few days before training camp. I'm not saying there's a holdout or anything else. It's just every part of this process has been a little bit different for Caleb. I think if you go back to the start of the process, I know the Bears would not have been the team that they were targeting to go to here, but Chicago owned that number one pick. They've had a lot of very frank and honest and positive discussions between Caleb Williams' team and the Bears. What Caleb and his people want to make sure is that you've got the infrastructure, the resources, the investment to let him go out there and chase the next goal, which is win a whole bunch of Super Bowls, be the greatest of all time. What have the Bears done in this offseason? They went out and got an offensive coordinator that they think is a fit in Shane Waldron, who's worked with different styles of quarterbacks. They retained Chris Morgan, who's one of the top offensive line coaches they think can help the run game. They signed DeAndre Swift. They traded for Keenan Allen. They really signaled to Caleb, you're our guy, we're all in, by trading Justin Fields for a 6th-round pick. When they did, my understanding is the sides are in a good place right now. When he came in for the visit, They had him go out to dinner with some of the veteran players. Those guys, I'm told, were really impressed with Caleb as well. All indications are, barring something going totally haywire here, he's going to be the quarterback of the Chicago Bears. What takes place, really, not just through this offseason and getting the contract done, but in his career. He's going to do things his own way. It's worked for him to this point. He's about to check the box as the number 1 overall pick, and now it's on to the next goal.
And in terms of moving on, let's move on to the next gentleman on your list. And the consensus, I'm talking to all of the scouts and coaches and executives. How many people did you speak to, by the way, the grand total? You got one? A number?
I would fairly say dozens. I've got a spreadsheet somewhere where I was tracking this for myself. I would say well over half the teams are represented through the quotes in the story, and certainly tried to have a variety of whether it's coordinators, position coaches, head coaches, GMs, area scouts, personnel directors, the full gamut.
Okay, and you found a couple that would have taken Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams if they had the choice? You found some?
Yeah, and of course it's easier to say when you're a scout or you're a personnel person. Well, I would take this guy because you're not the one putting your name on it. If you do something that out of the box, I mean, if Ryan Poles tomorrow walks into the room and says, "Hey, I think we're going to take Jayden Daniels," there'd be a lot of people taken aback, to say nothing of what we would think, to say nothing of what the public would think. I actually asked some general managers about this, Rich, and it was really interesting about, do you have a choice here? If you were Ryan Poles, would you even have the option to do the other thing? And the general response I got was, well, you have to do the right thing. Like, there's an argument. There are people in several different buildings, I can tell you, who would say Jayden Daniels, the complete product, the thrower, the productivity, the run element, they would lean in that direction. It's a different thing to actually turn in that card. They're also Drake Maye fans. Some people would put him as the number 2 quarterback in this draft. J.J. McCarthy certainly has fans as well. But I would say the majority, and the way that I had it ranked, was Jayden Daniels at number 2. Somebody who, if you go back to where he was at Arizona State and the way that things ended there, people were going to have like a day 2 type of a grade, like 3rd round pick on Jayden Daniels. But he really, remember when I talked to, put in the time and made himself a better quarterback. They do a lot of virtual reality training at LSU. He really embraced that. He studied. He did put on weight. There's still, the most common thing that you hear in terms of the critiques or the concerns with Jayden Daniels are, 2 years ago, he weighed in, this was verified, a $190, and he takes hellacious hits. If you've seen the edit that's been going around social media, Rich, of the hits on Jayden Daniels set to the Looney Tunes music, it's pretty good. It's pretty funny.
I have not seen that. However, the quote on this particular red flag involving Jayden Daniels that jumped out at me from your 13,000 words is you quoted an NFL executive talking about his skinny body. Quote, "He has a borderline Merton Hanks neck." That one jumped out at me, Tom.
I was just glad I got that one through the editor's Rich. You never know if a reference is too obscure.
No, I got
Merton Hanks like 30 years ago, but you and I were both on the same page. And as soon as that was said, I was like, I know exactly what that looks like. Listen, he's a narrow-framed type of an individual. I mean, you talk to people at Arizona State. I know, one of the issues was, why can't he put on weight? Is it, there was talk about, does he need, his own nutrition program? There's people who thought, it was a commitment thing. But, listen, he did bulk up. He showed up at Pro Day at 210, which was something that, was positive in scouts' minds. But it's still, he's not the biggest guy. You're going to have to make adjustments to your play style. One coordinator I talked to said, look at Anthony Richardson. Jayden Daniels takes hits like Anthony Richardson, and Anthony Richardson is a huge guy. He's 6'5" and like 235 pounds, and he got hurt 3 times in 4 games last season. Cam Newton was the MVP in 2015. He was out of the league 5 years later because just the hits add up, and those are much larger individuals. And so, yeah, I mean, you're going to need him to get down. You're going to need him to be able to curb it. There's always Lamar Jackson comparisons a little bit to Jayden Daniels, even though from what scouts and coaches say, he's a little bit more straight line. But Lamar has had this remarkable knack through his career. He's never really taken the big hit. Kyler Murray has the same thing, where Russell Wilson, these guys have figured out how to get down at the right moment, how to not take yards off the table, but to get down, don't take that hit. Jayden Daniels is going to be getting hit by bigger, faster, stronger people in the NFL. You're going to have to work with them on that and emphasize it. but that's a big part of his game. He's also a really, really talented passer. And some people think just in terms of pure passing ability, not arm strength, Rich, some people will put Jayden Daniels as the most talented passer in this draft.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show, and speaking to these dozens of unnamed executives and scouts and coaches, it does appear once again the consensus on Drake Maye is huge upside, but if you can sit him in 2024, you should. And that's why you found which team to be the perfect fit for him, consensus-wise then, Tom?
New England was the team that kept coming up because, when you're playing in the AFC East, you look through the course of time, whether it's Tom Brady, Josh Allen, you probably want a bigger, stronger type of a quarterback who in the elements, when it gets tough, is going to be able to withstand, playing in that division. Also, they got Jacoby Brissett. They're not a team that's sitting there going, we got a chance to win right now. You're maybe going to have a little bit less pressure on Drake Maye to get onto the field. I talked to one person who's very close with Drake Maye who said to me, listen, this is the same guy who, he grew up with older brothers. One of them won a basketball national title at North Carolina. One won a baseball national title at Florida. His dad was an athlete. Like, this is a guy who is used to being the young kid in the family, and he gets beat 100 times in a row at ping pong or pickleball or whatever. And it's like, all right, serve it up. Let's go one more time. So it's not that getting out there too soon is going to break him mentally or there's concerns about that. Everybody says in terms of like the makeup and who he is, the person you're getting, the lineage with the athletic family, all that stuff's good. It's just we've seen a lot of talented passers who they go into the wrong situation and it just can set them back. You saw that last year with Bryce Young, frankly, going into Carolina where he didn't have the best group around him. He didn't necessarily have the right fit from a schematic perspective, a coaching perspective around him. And I would fully anticipate Bryce Young's another guy who's going to bounce back this year mentally and is going to come back and do it. But he did not look like the same guy. He looked like he was shell-shocked through the course of last season. That's what you don't want to have, is set somebody's development behind. I had one head coach who knows quarterbacks really well, and he said, Drake Maye is Jordan Love. You got to sit him for 2-3 years. When you do, when he learns all this stuff, because he's also coming from that North Carolina offense that does not prepare guys for the NFL. We've seen it with, the transition for Sam Howell a couple of years ago. Every quarterback who comes out of that system, they just don't have a lot of NFL stuff that they can lean on here. So giving him that time, letting him develop, not putting the pressure on. We all know, Rich, that you start out 1-4 and the fans and the media start clamoring and there's pressure on everybody. But at least go into a place where Jacoby Brissett's a known commodity. He's been there before. He's probably your starter in 2024. That would make sense. And part of the drama of this draft is, what does Washington do at number 2? I think after that group visit that they had, there's a lot of people within the league who think Jaden Daniels will be the pick. But if it were Drake Maye, what does New England do at that point? Because there would be teams looking to come up the board and go get Jayden Daniels.
And what's your reporting on what happened there at the Prospect-a-Palooza at Washington? Is it really going to come down to whether Drake Maye outdrove Jaden Daniels at Topgolf? Is that the way it's going to come down to it?
There are different teams that have always done these group visits. I know the Vikings under Rick Spielman for years brought in all their 30 visits at once. Yeah. 49ers have done group visits, and that's where Adam Peters, the general manager, comes from. So that's an idea he kind of took and applied there. I don't remember a time, though, that 4 of the guys there are quarterbacks.
Crazy.
And you're sitting on the number 2 overall pick. You also have to remember, these guys had time at the combine. They've obviously reviewed all the tape. Some of the players, like Michael Penix, was at the Senior Bowl. You have dinners around the pro days. You have a lot of different ways that you can be able to get time with them.
It's not like they don't know each other, Tom. It's just that you got one last swing at it, And I found it interesting that the prospects were willing to play along. That that perhaps they didn't sit down and go, or maybe they did have a confab, these prospects with their agents and the representatives. They sit there and go, well, you can maybe schedule a one-on-one straight up conventional top 30 visit as your last with a team that might not really be interested in you or might not have the firepower to come up to draft you or might not be there. Or do you go along with what the Commanders want to do, and you got to be in it to win it? You got to buy that Powerball ticket by going into this mosh pit with the rest of the guys, Well,
I think this too, Rich. If this were a situation, let's say Chicago tried to do this. Hey, Jayden Daniels, Drake Maye, and J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, come on in. We're going to have all you guys and Caleb there at once. You're probably going to have a bunch of guys going, well, what are we really doing here? You're taking Caleb Williams. With Washington, part of the dynamic is there really is uncertainty at minimum within the league. And I know Adam Peters said internally they're getting close. You've got a lot of voices involved in that process, from Josh Harris, the new owner. Bob Myers has been a part of this process. Magic Johnson's in the process. Obviously, Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury. You're trying to work toward finalizing what you're going to do. But I do know this. There are fans of Drake Maye and have been through the course of the process. Certainly, Jaden Daniels is so dynamic. He's the Heisman Trophy winner. He's got fans there. And there were people coming out of the Washington Pro Day, and I believe we talked about this, Rich, on the show, who were really intrigued by J.J. McCarthy. I know we haven't gotten to J.J. yet, Rich, and you watched as much of him as anybody in the world. I thought it was really interesting, having done these stories for years and talking to everybody. We can all laugh about the Pro Day thing and what are you really going to learn you didn't already know from somebody throwing 70 routes on air with no defense out there. But J.J. McCarthy, the response to that Pro Day is as strong as I can remember for anyone since maybe like Sam Bradford. It was that good. And I think that there were two factors in this. One of them was people had not seen JJ throw live in a lot of cases. And because Michigan had so many players, they've got, 20 plus draft eligible guys there. Head coaches were there, coordinators were there, position coaches were there. A bunch of people who probably hadn't studied a ton of JJ McCarthy on tape, they all walked away going, man, his arm is a lot better. I had one head coach say to me, like, I didn't know JJ could roll like that. I mean, he really impressed people in person, but also because he didn't throw as much, you didn't see him make all the throws. Some of the critiques of McCarthy are, well, you're running this run dominant type of an offense. It's a lot of play action. There's guys who are wide open. It seems like at times he locks in onto that one guy and he gets away with it a little bit because you're facing Big Ten teams, and you may not be facing the same types of DBs that you will be in the NFL. So to get him in that space and actually just see him make those throws, there were things that they saw there, deep shots too, you really hadn't seen on tape. So there were people who walked away, and certainly Washington people who walked away too, thinking at minimum, we really got to think hard about this. Everybody's been talking about Caleb, Drake Maye, and Jaden Daniels forever. JJ's the guy who I think realistically, if you had polled people within the league going to this season, there's no way people would have thought we were talking about him as a potential, if not certain, top 10, maybe top 5 pick in the NFL. He's done enough through the course of the process. Obviously on the field, the winner, the moxie, the competitor, all that stuff's good. But the way that he interviewed, I was told he was brilliant when they got him in there. He really crushed the pre-draft process. That included the pro day. And at least if you're Washington or any team drafting up at the top, I had one head coach who I really trust, who again knows quarterbacks, and told me if I were Chicago this week, I'd be bringing in Caleb and JJ and grinding the bleep out of both of them because there's not enough evidence to say Caleb's clearly the guy. That's how much of an impression JJ made on a lot of people within the league, and that's why in all likelihood he's going to go sooner than anybody would have thought if he had him line up these quarterbacks back in September.
Yeah, I screen grabbed that very quote. I was going to bring it up, but you led yourself right to it. A head coach with a strong track record on quarterbacks, so clearly it's not a Jets head coach. Listen, Michael Penix Jr., sir, what do you think about the consensus here? It was the second grade. You have him listed in your piece as 1-2, rounds 1-2, and Peter Schrager, our colleague on Good Morning Football, in his mock had him falling completely out of the first round. What's your sense, speaking to all these folks and your ear to the ground, about what's going to happen with Penix 1 week from today? Is he still on the board, do you think?
Michael Penix might be the most polarizing quarterback prospect, Rich. I'd say JJ is polarizing to a certain degree, but Penix, I had, and you can find that first quote on Michael Penix. It's another good one. I'd love to hear your dramatic read of it. But there are people who will say he's the number 2 quarterback in this class, and I had other people who ranked him 7th, several people behind Spencer Rattler. With Michael Penix, he's unbelievable when he's playing on time. And we all saw that through the course of last season, assuming that you stayed up late enough to see some of those Washington games. When it's a clean pocket and he is in rhythm, he's really, really good. And everybody says he's really smart. He picks up on offense. I had one, I think it was a coach who told me like he can find guys. He's one of those quarterbacks who, when somebody pops open, he can find them with his eyes, which might sound like the dumbest thing ever, but there are guys who are just strictly going on progression. Penix is also instinctive. He does get through the progressions. He can process, but also he has the instincts to kind of figure out where that open guy is going to be. The concern with Penix is when it's not clean in the pocket, when he has to make plays off schedule, you're not entirely certain what's going to happen. He had a grand total of 8 rushing yards last season. His testing numbers were pretty good, which leads you to believe is part of it not an inability to be mobile, but a lack of want to be mobile. Because listen, the guy had 4 consecutive season-ending injuries. He's had 2 ACLs. He's had a shoulder. The knee got checked out. I would anticipate on a lot of boards he has a lower medical grade because 2 ACLs just creates a lot of a higher risk factor. And he's had the other injuries, but he's been healthy over the last 2 years here. It's nothing from what I've been told, and I've spoken to GMs, I've spoken to others about it. There's nothing in Penix's report that's going to cause him to fail a physical. But there's 32 teams, 32 doctors, 32 degrees of risk tolerance. And Penix is certainly going to be in that category, which brings us to the quote that I was going to have you read there, Rich. But the coaches are less concerned about that. This is much more from a coaching perspective with Penix about fit. If I had to guess to answer your question, Rich, I'd say yes, he comes off the board in round 1. But if he slides into round 2, that wouldn't stun me at all.
And you have Bo Nix, rounds 1 and 2 being projected there as well. So let's just brass tacks it here, since I'm kind enough to have you here for 20 minutes chopping this thing up. You've got the top 3 teams, right? And then you got the basically top 3 teams in the second tier from 11 to 20. You got 11, 12, and 13. You got Vikings, Broncos, Raiders. Those are all the quarterback-needy teams that you pretty much can peg as quarterback-needy teams, unless you throw the Giants in there. So which one of these teams is going to be left without a quarterback, do you think, in the first round? Give me the final number of it, because you can take 3 of them out. We're going to go quarterback, quarterback, quarterback. And then it's somebody, either somebody's going to trade up for McCarthy or the Giants will have him drop there, and then that'll be a big moment at 6 to see if he goes there. Which one do you think winds up out of those 7 teams without a quarterback? Could be the Giants. You heard Joe Shane say on Thursday they don't need to take one. So what do you think? What do you think?
The primary trade-up teams, when other teams have been projecting it, because you're going to get a lot of information, obviously, Rich, from teams like I do about players and where people see them and what other teams are going to do. No one's going to give you a really direct answer of what they're going to do themselves. So I would say other teams through the process have believed the 2 main threats to trade up are the Giants and the Vikings. The Raiders also would be on that list, but that's going to be more targeted. And the feeling within the league is the only way they would trade up is if Jaden Daniels is still on the board at number 3, which a lot of people right now think he's going to be gone at number 2. You mentioned the Broncos. My personal opinion, just knowing where they're at from a roster perspective, knowing kind of what people within the league think, I would think that they're a bigger threat to trade back than to trade up. They could certainly surprise me. Sean Payton has traded up in the first round or into the first round in the past year. But if I'm guessing, I'd say they're more likely to trade back. A lot of people think Bo Nix potentially would be a fit there, and you don't need to go up and get him. For the Vikings, they certainly have analyzed every different scenario. And I thought you actually got a little bit of truth serum from Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the GM, the other day when he said, there's several guys that they really like up at the top, and there's a couple other guys that they really like at certain value points. And I think that that's a reflection of, listen, if you asked everybody, the quarterbacks, their agents, where do you want your guy to go? Chicago's built a really nice situation there for Caleb Williams. He's stepping into a really good situation. But a lot of people would say, I'd love my guy to go to Minnesota and play with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and have Kevin O'Connell calling the plays and Brian Flores running the defense. That's a pretty good spot to be in here. And they may think, based on Kevin O'Connell's history here, that they can play with different types of guys. I mean, you just heard the breakdown I gave you on Michael Penix, a guy who, when it's clean, when he's in rhythm, he's really, really good. When it breaks down, you don't totally know what's going to happen. That kind of sounds like Kirk Cousins, who's been playing for the Vikings for the past 7 years. They won a bunch of games, just got $45 million a year from the Atlanta Falcons. So you could play with a Penix in Minnesota. You could play with a Bo Nix, who, with Nix, it's really about what's the upside, because he was on the full-on Van Wilder plan. He started 61 college games at several different places. A lot of his passes, 2/3 of his completions almost last year within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, he set the completion percentage record, but it was influenced by this quick hit, RPO type of a passing game. But everybody says if you get him around really good weapons, he could be a caretaker type of guy. He's regarded by a lot of people within the league as maybe a 2, maybe upside to like a mid-tier type of a starter. But if you're in Minnesota, you're going, well, we got Jefferson and Addison and Kevin O'Connell. They'll elevate the level of the quarterback. I could see that being a fit. I certainly could see JJ being a fit. Drake Maye makes sense. You can make the argument Jaden Daniels, he plays a little bit different style in terms of the run element. But we saw Josh Dobbs running around for a few games there before the Pasternaut train ran out of gas. So I think the Minnesota's got a lot of different options here. Trading up absolutely is an option. But Washington, even before Adam Peters said it publicly yesterday, Washington had been putting out signals since going back to the combine that, listen, we're probably going to stay put and take a guy. New England has been much more open, but to the extent that anybody's expecting that, okay, New England's definitely moving, I would guess, Rich, I would make an educated guess here. Nothing's firm. Different things can happen. But I would bet that if New England makes a trade for number 3, it happens on the clock Thursday night in Detroit. Because until they know who goes at number 2, number 1, they don't know who's going to trade in to number 3. And number 2, they don't know if their guy potentially might be the one who's sitting for them to take.
So which of those teams walks away, your best guess? I know you're not usually in the crystal ball business, but which one comes away with no quarterbacks after Thursday night? You could say multiple.
I think
which ones?
I would think, based on the fact that there are other teams such as Minnesota that are willing to trade up and get ahead of the Giants, I would say the Giants, unless they make a move up, will be the team that most likely gets beat. Okay. It's going to be a matter of what's the value point at which the Vikings would make a move up if it's not for a Jayden Daniels or a Drake Maye. If it's for J.J. McCarthy, are they willing to go up to number 4 or perhaps number 5, where Jim Harbaugh might love the idea of somebody trading up and taking McCarthy at number 5 and he gets more picks to build that thing out there in L.A.? It's certainly a possibility. Or they might feel like, you know what, we'll roll the dice and let's see if JJ comes to us at number 11. All those options are on the table. But if I had to guess to answer your question, I'd say it's the Giants.
All right, Tom. For everybody, everyone should read this. Go to Tom's Twitter feed at Tom Pelissero or NFL.com to check out this. And since we just dove straight into it, I guess we should say goodbye the way we normally bring him in. Guys, should we do that?
Yeah.
All right, Tommy.
Hey, I didn't know we were going there.
See you in Detroit, Tom. We'll see you in Detroit. Take care, Tom. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.